This is kind of a bonus lecture. I was kind of just looking at this picture, and sometimes when you think something's kind of done and you step away from it for a little bit and you come back, you start to notice things that still could be improved. And this is kind of the the curse of being a compositor or sort of an artist or something, is like you have to at some point choose when a picture is done. And you can always improve something more if you have time and you want to try to just think about little things you can do to bring it to the last level. And this is kind of, if you think about it, it's sort of the last 20% of a comp. So I guess, the last 20% of a comp is the hardest. This is the hardest part, and this is like the final portion. You can take it from the level we're at now to a really final level. So yeah, this is the hardest part to learn, because you have to train your eye to be able to do this. And yeah, a lot of people can get it up to the integration level, but the last 20%, like I said, is something that will take practice and experience. So I'm just going to bring you guys through what I took for this image and brought it to this image. So this is the difference of what I was just doing, playing around, looking at this image. So this is after and this is before. So I'm going to just point out some things I showed you guys, and I'm not going to go through every single node that I did to do this, because I don't think that's really beneficial. I think that showing you my logic of how I was seeing these things is probably more useful to you. And I've marked every area in the script that these changes have been made in. So of course, I'll briefly go through them at a little bit of a faster speed, but having you copy just every single little color correction I do isn't going to teach you how to think about color, which is actually what's more important, and thinking about relationships between color. So this might to you look like a small change, but actually it's pretty significant. So I'm going to start pointing it out, and you'll see how I kind of thought about this. And like I said, I was looking at this picture at one point. It's like, it looks pretty good. I think I'm pretty close to being finished. And then I just kept trying to stare at it. A lot of times I'll just stare at a picture for 10 minutes, flipping and just looking around the picture, zooming out and trying to see what is it that doesn't feel natural, or what could be improved with this picture. A lot of times you just need to look at your picture and just spend time staring at it, trying to think of it more of it as an abstraction than looking at it as a picture, as the elements that it is. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll put a mirror on my thing and I'll kind of flip it horizontally. And you'll see a lot of concept artists do this as well. Let me see what's happening here. There we go. I think my nuke is not refreshing for some reason. Anyway, so yeah, let me restart my nuke. Looks like it's not keeping up for some reason. So I'll just restart real quick here. So I'm looking at this picture and I'm kind of flipping it back and forth and just trying to discover, maybe I'll play through and play it mirrored or something like that, and just try to see what is it that doesn't feel natural, or not necessarily natural, but, what could just be improved compositionally, and what are some artistic steps we can make to just, tell the story better and sort of draw the eye better. So a couple things I noticed when I was looking at this picture, and I'll start to draw it out, is a couple relationships still feel a little bit disconnected, and we can improve them just a tiny bit. So I'll show you what I did, and then I'll show you how I did it. So this will hopefully help you guys out. But again, this wasn't immediately obvious to me. Sometimes when you've stared at a picture for a long time, some things that may be obvious, they don't pop out to you because you've been working on the picture for so long. So sometimes you just need to walk away, look at something different, come back to it, and then you'll see things that you didn't see before. So I was looking at this and I was like, well, you know what, this highlight and this building, it still could be a little bit brighter. So this relationship, it still could be improved a little bit in terms of just telling this. And, we know that this was actually probably not the lighting that this character was getting. Like I said, this was probably getting more kind of front lit from a real light. But we can cheat this a little bit in comp and make it a little bit more side lit. And what we can do is sort of darken this area. So we could darken this a little bit more. And this is not necessarily integration at this point, because it's still relatively well integrated, but it's still going to look better, I think. So, you can integrate a little bit better. So I guess this is why this is a bonus lecture, because technically you could probably get this passed and it would work, but you can always improve it. So here I would kind of darken this down, and then here we would sort of brighten these up. So that's going to help that relationship a bit. But that's okay. That's one thing. But then, if you want to look at more of an abstract thing, like I said, look at your pictures in abstraction. Look at areas that stand out. One particular area that stood out to me was this highlight, because you get this really just white dot in the center of your frame. And of course this can happen, and that's totally fine. But, maybe, just to break it up a little bit might be a little bit better compositionally. So you can kind of break this highlight up into smaller bits, just so we're not getting a white dot in the center of our frame. And again, we're thinking of this as an abstraction. It's not, this totally could happen in real life, that there's so much light in one area that it does this. But is that going to be the best image that we can make? We're still making a movie, you know what I mean? So that's kind of how we want to think about it. So I was like, okay, well, we could break this up. And then I keep looking around, try to find some other things. And, one thing that stood out to me was this area still feels a little bit dark. So if I go here, this still's a little bit dark, and it's kind of hard to read our character off the background. So maybe we could, not just dark, but it's also a color thing. So brightness things are easier to spot than color things, because your eyes are more sensitive to luminance changes than they are to color. So what I wanted to do is just bring this up a little bit and add a little bit of color to it. So I wanted to add a little bit of blue to it and just bring up the value a little. So it kind of separates them off, but it's not a lot. This is not a big change. This is just to add, a little bit more difference between these, but still make them feel similar enough that they belong in the same environment. Another thing I wanted to do was just, maybe to help this character again, maybe we could add a little bit of light coming off of this little lamp here, just casting onto this wall, some bounce light. So that would kind of help if we had a soft light kind of separating the edge of our character, which is here. We're going to separate that off, and we're going to feel that difference even more. So those are a couple of things. And you can see that, okay, these changes are starting to add up. And so that's a couple things. Let me go further in the frame here, and I'll show you some more things that I was thinking. So I went along in sequence watching it. And again, I maybe look at it for 10 minutes or 15 minutes. You just look at the picture and, flip it back and forth. And, one thing I spotted was this seemed to stand out to me was we have this sort of black, again, looking at the image as an abstraction, as black and white shapes of value rather than looking at the picture as what it is. I saw this kind of black shape that sort of feels like it's all connected into one long kind of black shape. And these two buildings are very far from each other. So I say, well, this, maybe we could separate this a bit more by just adding a little bit of color into this black one. So basically it's a color thing. So your eyes are a little bit less sensitive to these color shifts. But it would help separate this background from our foreground as well if we just add a bit of color. So what I did was I added a little bit of blue fog into this, just a tiny bit. It's really, really small change, but we add a little bit of blue fog into this and a little bit of orange fog near the lights, because the lights are going to light up the fog. So you're going to get a little bit more orange fog. And as it goes up, it's going to turn into more of a blue color. And that's also going to help with this sort of weird shape that appeared here, which is, let me just go to a different frame. So this weird coincidence that we create this sort of black line that's kind of traveling across our frame. Let me draw this real quick here. Yeah, so this kind of effect that this is almost one thing. Another thing that I noticed looking at this frame in particular, we already talked about the areas we're going to tweak down here and here, but maybe we could just literally bring up this whole area with a bit of color and brightness. So we could just take a soft grade, not even on the background or the foreground, but just at the end of the comp. So when you give a shot to a DI person, which is like a color correction artist. Usually a compositor will actually hand it off to a color correction artist, and they'll do these really soft grades over the picture. And it doesn't have, they don't even use the alphas. They just put these really soft like radials over the end. And that will sort of help tell the story a bit. So we can literally just do a really, really soft circle here and just bring it up and bring some color into it as well. So those are some of the changes that I did. And now we can just look at them. So I'm going to go back and just take a look. So you can see, even though they all feel like small changes, it dramatically changes the picture. So we see here, I'll just walk you through it again. Here we get a little bit more interactive on the side, and we darken here just with some soft grades, which really gives us some directionality, and it makes it feel like, you know, those light is kind of interacting a bit stronger. We have that really soft grade, and I did a little bit of stuff behind him as well. So I'm going to show you guys that as well. So again, I did a soft grade overall, which kind of brings color into his face and brightness. But I also added some very slight atmosphere just behind. So if you look at the difference, it's just, you're just reading the silhouette of the person a little bit more. Now, we don't want to make it so strong that we get a conflict of value like I talked to you guys about before, because you're going to get something really bright and something dark, and then it won't feel integrated. So it's like this kind of dichotomy where it's a balance. Everything is sort of, you can push it too far. And so it's sometimes you want to push it too far just to see it and then kind of bring it back a little bit. So you see it starts to bring color in here. I also added a movie crop, sort of just, you know, cinema crop. It makes it a little bit more cinematic to add that crop on there. And then you see I've added some light down here, and it starts to read our character just slightly better. Let me go towards the start of the shot. So you can see here, here's some of the difference I did. A little bit more color, tiny bit more light. But more so it's a color thing in the blue in this case. And then you can see the fog I added sort of helps with the buildings. We kind of added a little bit blue behind, and it's sort of giving some more depth to this picture. And also, if I just gain up here, it just separates this building from this one very slightly. And these are like 5% changes. This is why I call it like kind of the last 20% of the comp, because these are really, really small changes. And then the last thing I did, actually, something else I noticed just playing through was I wanted to add a flare coming from this stuff. So you can see here I did some roto paint to kind of break up that shape a little bit. But I also added kind of a lens flare. So this is sort of subtle. Let me see if I can just check up the comp here. I'll just let that load for a second. Make sure that this is the latest. Yep, so this is the latest. But there is a very slight lens flare I added. You can't really tell because it's very subtle, but yeah, let's just check it out here. So yeah, this is a very slight lens flare I added over the character. If we just take a look at the actual lens flare. So that would just kind of be a story point as well, because again, where does your eye go? It goes to the brightest thing. So if we can draw the attention just to the place we want a little bit. So it's very subtle. You see, it's lifting his face a little bit, but when his head covers that area up, it sort of hides that flare. So it's kind of popping on and off, which actually gives more motion to our picture. So you see how it's lifted here, and then as soon as his head goes over, that color correction goes away. So whenever you add motion and brightness to something, you're going to draw attention to it. And the same thing overall. I did a very slight, if I gain up here like crazy, you can see there is a lens flare going on here. But you see, if I play it through, it kind of disappears and then it reappears. And this is happening very, very subtly. Like it's like the mix is like really, really low on this. So it's a very subtle effect, but again, it's something you feel more than you see. So if you look here closely, it pops on and off. Just if I go frame by frame, and you can see if I look here. So if you look along this line, it's very difficult, but it's a very subtle thing, and it's kind of popping on and off, and it just brings a tiny bit of motion and life into this area. So especially here, so it's kind of two flares. You have one here and one kind of going across. So those are the really small details you can add, and Yeah, I'll start going through them now so we can just start to explain them. One other thing I added, this is just an extra, was I just added some red lights onto the buildings. So if I just compare here, let me just load it before the crop. So I thought that, it might be cool if maybe some of these buildings had like, the little lights on top of the buildings that kind of tell airplanes, not to hit them. I just made them a little bit more red. So I just did like a red dot on the background that was kind of brighter than all the other dots. And it's a little bit saturated more than the other ones. You see all these are orange and kind of more neutral, but then I add just like a red one. And I added a couple of these. So I added one here, I added one here, I added one here, and I added one here. So it kind of, if you're looking at the background image, it kind of just, it's sort of directing your eye as well. So you're kind of, when you look at this picture, the intention is that you kind of look back here and your eye is going to scan across into the brightest area. Or, potentially your eye might just go directly here because it's a very quick shot. But if it does go over here, you're kind of still trying to direct the eye back. So that's just a total extra that you can add. And then the last thing I added was a very slight lens flare, even more on the top. So sometimes if you look at, because we added a little bit of fog to the background, and on foggier days, if you go walk in a big city and you look at the sky and you look at tall buildings that are bright on a foggy day, you'll notice that sometimes the clouds act as a bounce card. So if you have these clouds up here, you have like these thicker clouds, and you basically shoot light up onto them. So you have like light from this building. Essentially what happens is you get this this light kind of bouncing around and creating like a glow almost. So sometimes you can get like an actual sort of lens flare. So this light from the building is hitting a thick cloud. So here's like a thicker cloud, but then this glow, it's not really a glow. This is sort of mist. So you can still see this light passing through. It's kind of a glowy mist. So that light is kind of bouncing back, but it creates like a halo in the atmosphere. So yeah, that's something you could add. So basically I just added a very slight mist glow as if this building is casting up onto a thicker cloud. So that's a pretty high level of detail for a shot like this, but I will step through. I basically marked all the changes with a little X. So that's the extra part that you can do. And you can see there's a bunch of them. They're all like just little stuff, but I'll just quickly go through for those people who are interested on how I took it to this final level with those changes. So I'll just go back. So first things first, I darkened the sky. I'm going to go through this a bit faster as well. So hopefully you guys can follow along. But again, the intention is not that you copy every node. It's that you understand the concepts. And yeah, so darken the sky. Most of the stuff was already here. Water movement, all the stuff we did. Brightness for glints. So the red light thing, pretty simple. Just go in there, roto a really rough red shape, basically constant, and you can brighten it beyond 1. So you see the value is like 3. So if you brighten it a little bit further, we know that when we go out of focus, it just looks like a ugly red dot when it's in focus. But I know that when this goes out of focus, if I make it slightly, the values above 1, they're going to pop a little bit more. So that's kind of nice. And then let's see. And then I just did some very small changes, like desaturating this area a little bit. It was more saturated, so it kind of brought it down. And okay, so the fake fog. So this is where people might be interested in how I did this. This is pretty straightforward again, but it helps, I think. So basically I just did a bunch of roto shapes like this. So kind of I'll just do it real quick. So I did like a really rough roto shape and I feathered out like crazy. And then basically what you want to do is other roto shapes in front of it and just stencil it. So you do a minus. I'm going to turn off the clip. So it's just like this. And so the buildings that are closest to us will completely cut it out. But the buildings that are further away, we'll just duplicate this and we'll just mix that back. So this one will feel like it's further away because it's still getting some fog. but it's still cutting out a bit. So that's the concept. So pretty much that's all I did. The ones that are close, really dark, the ones that are further away, fade off into the fog. And then what I did was I did 2 color corrections. I did one that's blue. So it's a slight lift. So I'm using the lift to bring the black point up. And then I'm adding a little bit of blue into it. So I'm just using the lift here. And then I did one that was orange. So I did one that was orange and blue. 2 versions, like kind of branched off into 2 different things. And then I mixed them together using a rotoshape. So I mixed the orange color correction into the lower part of the fog, and then I kept the top more blue. So it gives you the impression that if I just disable it, you can see we have this blue fog that we've added, and we're just making the lights interact with it in the city. So if you compare before and after, so we're adding a lot of color into our picture. We're not adjusting the brightness much. It's really more of a color thing. And that's going to help in the final comp. And so we step through, and then we do our defocus, and you can see, let's just disable this whole thing, and we can just see again if we just go before and after the fog. So that's before, and that's after. So you see how it adds a bit of color. And then we'll continue through. This is another thing I did. Here's a little atmosphere thing I added. So this is just a noise pattern, very slight again, but I just wanted to add a little bit more color into this area and a little bit more lift behind the guy so that we can read him. And this is subtle. You got to be careful with these type of changes, but basically just blur the picture like crazy and multiply it through a noise. And you can merge that over the picture, and you basically, what's that doing is kind of taking the colors that are here and pushing it out, and also kind of brightening the blacks a little bit. So it's really simple technique, just blur, multiply it against the smoke, and then you stencil it, you kind of cut it into the areas you want and put it over. And you can animate it very slightly. And let me just go to the bottom here. Okay, so let's just keep going further. The overhead glow. So I just did, that's pretty simple. It's just a rotoshape. I used my custom node here. I have a YouTube tutorial about that if you guys want to check it out on Compositing Academy on YouTube. Basically, this node I created, it kind of just makes roto fall-offs look more like a light than like a feather. So for example, if I take a rotoshape and I blur it out, if I put this on it, it actually makes it feel like a light. So I can, one little glitch with this is you need to kind of grade it down very slightly beforehand, just so that it fades into it nicely. But it works really well because it gives you a quadratic light type of effect. And that's kind of, I don't know, it just looks better for like a glow. It's a different way to create a glow, sort of. It's kind of a technique that I created. I don't really know anyone else who uses this, but I find it very useful, so that's my particular preference. And then one other thing I did was, I forgot to mention this in the before and after. I added some glints. So I kind of keyed the very highlights, and I added a little bit of glints on top of our footage at the end. And that kind of just helps sell the photographic nature of this. So if you look very close, it's just adding a little bit of star pattern around some of our highlights. And it looks kind of nice sometimes to have those very tiny details on the edges. So you can see, I mean, it's very subtle if we look at it, but it does add something, especially when the camera's a little bit more in focus. Something to keep in mind is when a camera is going out of focus, it's sort of averaging the colors around it. So meaning some of the highlights will get a little bit more dim because it's kind of blurring the colors from around. So these star patterns might appear more on the start of the footage than the end. So you can see they're more defined at the start. If we zoom in, we can see really some star patterns appearing there. But as we go out of focus, they become a bit softer with the rest of the picture, which is fine. But just keep it in mind. And so the broad color grade I did, you can see I literally just took a big circle here and brightened this up a little bit and add a bit of blue. And that just helps to see our character a little bit better, but it doesn't separate him from the background. If I just did this correction on him, he might start to feel a little bit too bright. So sometimes it's cool to just do a secondary color correction at the end of the comp, and it keeps the integration feeling the same because you're doing this brightness overall. if you color correct things separately, you're going to break the integration. And that's something you want to think about is like sort of, if you brighten him or you brighten this, you know, we've already gotten these feeling like they go together. So sometimes that's how I approach it. And then the lens flares at the end. So I can explain the lens. I'll explain the lens flares in just a second. But let me just go back and explain the other thing I did here, which was just more of the stuff we were doing earlier that I showed you guys in terms of like kind of keying the highlights and sort of brightening them. So if I disable that and enable, it just kind of brought out the highlights a bit more. And also, I did a rotoshape here to darken it. I'm not sure if I marked that. Here it is. So yeah, I just did like a rotoshape to add more shadow as well, because I felt like it was, you know, we brought the highlights up, but it just feels too bright here. So like by adding a little bit more shadow, it feels more directional. And I only did it sort of in the center because I didn't want to darken all over here, because then it almost becomes unreadable. So I kind of just did it right in the middle there. And yeah, so that's kind of where I got it to. And let's just see, that was pretty much it. And then at the end, you can add a little bit of a crop to make it more of a movie format. So let me explain the lens flares real quick, and that will be pretty much it for the integration. That's kind of an extra lesson because, again, this is not really about matching colors at this point. This is all creative compositing techniques, which is not primarily what this class is focused on. But I think that extra information people will appreciate. So let me look at this. This is just a flare node. So if you create a flare node from scratch, there's a couple presets here that you can start with, which is what I usually do if you only have the flare. There's a plugin called Optical Flares that makes much better flares, but it's not free. So you know we're just using the flare, which you can do a lot with if you think creatively. You got to think outside the box a little bit sometimes, and sometimes that takes practice. But so what you can do is so we select like large rainbow, and sometimes you can get this nice flare that is kind of interesting. It's kind of a rainbow flare. And you have some controls here, size control, chroma spread, different things like that. What I would recommend is maybe Googling a picture of some flares and trying to recreate it from just basic shapes. But I just kind of used something like that, and I just adjusted the position. And one thing you can do is you can make it more straight on the edge, sort of. So this is more of a circle, but I think it's edge flattening. It is. You can sort of make it, you can adjust the shape of it. So I kind of made it more of a, because our picture, if you remember the bokehs, they're kind of more kind of hexagonal or pentagon, I guess, sort of shape like this. So I kind of wanted my flare to be sort of similar. So I kind of flattened it out a little bit. And I took the color out just to get a black and white picture. And sort of, I took the background color, I blurred it, and I used that to create the color for our flare. So it's going to flare in the same tones as our background, rather than trying to color correct this manually. And then what I did was I kind of brought out the highlight a little bit with a luminance key. And I used an X distort. This is a custom node from Nukepedia. You guys can grab it if you want. Basically, it's the same technique as the iDistort method that we talked about with the water. It's pretty much exactly the same thing, except you can just do it with one node. So somebody created that with BlinkScript on Nukepedia. So if you want that node, you can grab it from here. So basically, it just kind of distorts it, and you get some crazy thing like this. And then I just blurred it. So now you get an effect that looks kind of like this weird sparkling sort of shape. And I can't play it, unfortunately, because it's not cached. But if I just go between those two frames, you can sort of see that it just gives us this little motion and kind of light effect. And then we're just adding that over the top of the image with a plus. And so what you want to do with a lens flare is if the light source is visible, it's on. But as the character passes over, you want to key it off. So basically the lens flare is on, and then something blocks it. You key it off. Key it off, key it off, key it back on. So it's something that pops on and off as something passes over it. So if you keep it on the whole time, it's going to look totally fake. So that's just something to think about. So that's pretty much it for the lens flare, and same thing with this one. I just used the lens flare. I used the preset, literally just if you go to the default flare and you create the multi-penta, I think it is. Yeah, it's this one. So I just used the preset and sort of desaturated it. I blurred it a bunch, and then I also kind of scaled it up and merge that over itself. So you get like different size ones. You have small ones and big ones. And then I just put that over the top of the image as well. But I kept this very subtle because I didn't want to overdo it. If you overdo it, again, it's going to look so obvious and fake. And it's, it's not uncommon to see some people overdo lens flares. So be careful. Yeah, that's pretty much it for all of the things I did for the last, I guess, 20%. This is the little bonus. If you've actually done the project up to this point and you're trying to do the whole thing, I would recommend trying to do those little things, or maybe trying to match my picture and like really study what I did and try to think about why. Even though I've just explained it, I think that could definitely help out people in that difficult stage, which is the last creative aspects of finaling an image. So it's not, if you're working on a show, like this might have been far enough, depends, whatever, but I still think that this result ultimately has a final polish to it. So we're going to go into the QC stage next. So that's it for the creative stuff, and hopefully you guys have enjoyed that. And we will go through and find all the little things. I have a couple more techniques we can talk about as well for, fixing some areas, some tricky areas that we run into. And yeah, we'll move on.